Hello everybody, my name is Conray, and today I will be going over some research I've done into Microsoft Paint and memes and how I believe they synergize into a novel webcomic style. So to begin talking about this novel style derived from Microsoft Paint, aka MS Paint, I need to define what it looks like. So in doing so, I'm going to quickly compare it to these two other styles that I term as smooth line style and pixel art. Smooth line style is certainly the most popular for webcomics. It is the most transferable from traditional handmade comic styles and features incredibly smooth line work. It's also anti-alias, but I'll get into that a little bit later. On the other side is pixel art, which is unabashedly digital. Each single pixel, the tiny squares, are meticulously placed to have specific visual meaning and interpretation. One pixel for the iris, a couple pixels for the mouth folds, and it's readable. I believe the MS Paint style fits snugly between these two, where it features line work that is not smooth and is authentically digital in its sharp, aliased edges, and it's not meticulous in that the line work is very free-handed. This comic for Penny Arcade by Hulkins and Kralik is more of that smooth line style, very crisp and finely tuned. And then Steven Diesel's Sweeties is that meticulous pixel art, very focused where even just a couple white pixels can signify movement. But one of the biggest signifiers of the MS Paint style is its use of aliased line work. Compared to the smooth line style, the aliased line work is jagged, going from pure black to pure white in this case. But for the smooth line style, its anti-aliased line work features smooth gradients going from black to various grays until becoming white. And this is done to make the lines appear more curved, smooth, and high quality when zoomed out. Some other key aspects of the MS Paint style include these little white specks that appear if a web cartoonist is using MS Paint and the brush tool rather than the pencil tool. If they wanted to fill in a shape with a certain color, like this grayish blue, the gradient edges would appear as white specks around the line work. This is because those who use MS Paint are bound by the limitations of the program, as there are no layers to have seamless color fills in the background. And in addition, if you were to scale something up, it uses nearest neighbor scaling, which just basically means it preserves the hard, jagged pixel edges without any gradients. But why choose MS Paint? Well, among many things, it's a program that was pre-installed on Windows computers. Being a software specifically made by Microsoft for their hardware, you didn't need to download any outside program. You could just click run and bam, you could just start drawing whatever you wanted. With the various limitations also present in MS Paint, it also made the barrier to entry incredibly easy for anyone to understand how to use it. Okay, now I wanted to give you this warning because before we continue, we're going to be diving into some very lowbrow, crude humor in the following webcomics. But please bear with me if you're more of that highbrow academic type, or you can laugh if you're, a fan of crude things. Starting with David Reese, he began making this expletive-rich webcomic back in 1999 when he was temping for his wife's aunt's office. While there, he had so much free time, they decided to make some comics while he was there. And he chose to do so in another Microsoft program called PowerPoint. The main reason being that much like how MS Paint is pre-installed on Windows computers, office buildings routinely had the Microsoft suite installed to all their computers. It also gave Reese an entire library of clip art that he could simply copy and paste into various black outline rectangles and squares and create a comic. That's an incredibly low barrier of entry. Also important to note here is we see early staples of the MS Paint style. The craftsmanship isn't meticulous, and we also see that Reese isn't afraid to show how digital the work is. In particular, notice how pixelated this clip art is on the bottom left. Rather than finding something of higher quality, Reese actually leans into it, and this entire strip is actually about how tired these kung fu fighters are, to the point that their bodies haven't put themselves together yet, and this pixelization is the manifestation of that. We also see the nearest neighbor scaling happening here, where Reese is using the same image and scaling it up for the zoom-ins here, showing the rigid pixels in all of their glory. And this is assumedly the first comic called a Rage comic, and was posted anonymously to the website 4chan in 2008. These comics were specifically drawn in MS Paint and were intensely popular from the late 2000s to the early 2010s, and their mimetic offspring still persist today, but in almost completely different, evolved forms. These are unique in the broader span of webcomics in that anyone could use the same characters, oftentimes assumed to be copy and pasted, and formed their own comics from them. There was no governing body, single artist, or otherwise. It was just from an assumed shared visual language of reusable symbols used by an in-group of internet users. And if you couldn't tell, they were crude. Crude in style and crude in subject matter. It would appear as if someone had the idea to draw this and drew it as quickly as they could, even copy and pasting the same sitting form for 3 panels. And an interesting point to note here is that these are, by most metrics, crude, and yet they were intensely popular and remixed time and time again by thousands and thousands of people for years. Common internet users saw some value in them, despite their crude exterior and crude interior. We also see the memification of webcomics arising in things like this, where much more rendered and detailed webcomics, like this one by Casey Green, gets morphed into a character to be used in the MS Paint style Rage comics, as this common copy and pasted character known as Mother of God guy by some other internet user. We also see more characters from Rage comics like the notorious Trollface by Carlos Ramirez. First made to mock trolls, it is now a ubiquitous online symbol for the archetype, and mockery is certainly becoming a constant theme in the MS Paint style webcomics. And a bit of a historical note, the remixing and parroting history of what eventually formed the Trollface can actually be tied all the way back through Mighty Mouse and to Superman, the iconic comic character here. And if we head into the contemporary present, about 16 years after Ramirez's Trollface, we have Gaz Nyach, an independent web cartoonist who routinely draws these off-putting cats. Each webcomic purposely posted with crusty compression artifacts akin to an old JPEG image, or similarly to a reposted beyond repair meme, and done in this MS Paint style. If you had a careful eye, you also see in the bottom left panel, the game show host cat also references the Trollface with his facial expression. And when interviewed, I was also able to find out why they were using such a style, stating that the use of the style is meant to mimic classic memes, since a lot were just MS Paint doodles. In fact, Gaz here doesn't even use MS Paint as a program to draw the webcomic, yet they still emulate it for nostalgic and mimetic purposes, where they're meant to look ancient. And interestingly, the MS Paint style almost seems to be evolving from a parody of crudeness into a sincere attempt at producing something of meaning and high desire. We have highly popular web cartoonists such as Beetle Moses here, actually changing their style from smooth line to MS Paint, and the MS Paint one looks so much more refined. And if you believe it, he's also routinely commissioned by lots of sports teams like the Seattle Seahawks, Atlanta Falcons, Chicago Bears, or the Green Bay Packers, among many others, to create MS Paint webcomics to advertise their games. Sort of changing pace here, I wanted to show you what the typical popular webcomic looked like at the time before and during the Rage comic era. We see a setup here with Penny Arcade of these 2 main characters referencing a topical video game, and the theme is somewhat interesting. It's the psychology of relationships and the disconnect between that and online video games, as you might assume different roles as whatever avatar you wanted to be for role-playing purposes. And the idea ends with subversion, giving the punchline that Gabe, the one on the outside, would be okay with cheating if his wife did it with other women, playing into his male fantasy. But you also see another underscoring subversion with the carrot becoming the snowman's lower appendage rather than a typical nose, showing where the 2 male characters' minds are truly at. And it's all very crude humor, but look at the scene here. It's a very detailed backyard with a dynamic camera angle, and all the line work is very clean and high quality, which seems at odds with the writing being so dirty, lowbrow, and oftentimes shallow. They've even added the small detail of Gabe's breath, creating fog when he speaks. This webcomic, Penny Arcade, was immensely popular too, getting tens of millions of views, also leading them to create a major gaming convention called PAX, or Penny Arcade Expo, and it's still one of the more popular gaming conventions today. This comic has what I would determine as very high-quality visuals, but with crude and shallow writing. If we move back into the more contemporary webcomic scene, we see a rise of web cartoonists utilizing a crude art style that firmly has its origins in MS Paint, like Gaz, but in this one by Chevy, who created Crawfish Comic. She utilizes the same style with aliased line work and a seeming lack of meticulousness. The figures are rendered crudely, even at times having the white coloring show up outside the black outlines, and characters lose fingers. She's even misspelled her own signature in the bottom left panel. Yet, if we critically look at the comic, it's actually exploring the passage of time between panels in a very complex way, and shows a strong understanding of how different elements work visually in comics. Is this red-eyed figure reacting by seeing into the future? Is it anxiety? Who drew the gun first? Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? It's very interesting and very dense, despite its crude shell. In an interview by Tom Harrison and Joe Bernardi of the Anime Sickos podcast, Chevy talks in depth about her webcomic practice, and plainly states that her ethos on why she uses a crudely drawn style and gives us this candy wrapper metaphor. It essentially goes like this. If you have some candy and it's in a beautiful wrapper, you might expect the candy to be high quality and delicious. If you have some candy in a cheap looking crude wrapper, you might expect the candy to be low quality and taste bad. In both instances, the person experiencing the candy feels like both are authentic to what they are, they're not lying about what they are, and they meet expectations. The really interesting part happens when there is inconsistency in this. If you have some candy in a beautiful wrapper, but the candy is disgusting and tastes bad, the candy enjoyer is going to be obviously upset. Their expectations were not matched, as they were expecting something of high quality. And if you have some candy in a crude wrapper, but the candy is delicious, the candy enjoyer might be happily surprised. Their expectations were not matched, but they were exceeded. They received something of greater value than what they originally thought they would get. To compare it to art, a viewer has specific expectations based firstly on the visuals they see in front of them. Once they dive deeper and begin to think more critically to analyze a piece, if their expectations are met or exceeded, they leave the artwork feeling some sense of valuable understanding, or it reinforces their typical thinking. If their expectations are not met, they leave the work feeling dissatisfied. By utilizing the crude aesthetic, an artist is safely able to either stay on par and give crude reflections, like a rage comic, or they're able to surpass it and give something complex, or make a beautiful point that wasn't expected. The ones utilizing more highly crafted and skilled visual renderings have more work to do in reinforcing the visuals with the conceptual or narrative side that they might be exploring. It's essentially a higher bar to cross, and the viewer knows when you don't cross it. By taking a look at this comic by Chevy, in this scene we still see her typical use of aliased line work and crudely rendered figures, but we also see the exploration of a highly thought out scene. We see two haphazardly smashed together toys being narrated by two kids. Super Frog, Simp Chup Plumber will win so easily. That's cool, but not a match for Winnie the Frog's Fire Chidok. Appearing to be in a war-torn area with fighter jets darting the sky above, despite their surroundings, these children are still able to engage in fantastical play, utilizing these scrambled and crude toys as their vessels for expression. To me, that's a much more complex and thought-provoking concept to discuss in the work compared to the Rage comics shown earlier, with the toilet, or even the highly rendered Penny Arcade comic about crude gamer humor. This one comic alone proves to me that in the ugly, able to find beauty, and in more ways than one. So to conclude, the MS Paint style can be found in many places. It's firmly used in popular culture and still being utilized today. It has many unique qualities that define it to be novel. It's based in online meme culture and is easily approachable. Its crude shell doesn't define it as only being capable of crude meaning, and it shines when it's able to surpass expectations. Thank you.